Hello YouTube, welcome to Fine Day, and today we are going to have a look at the Alchemy Rebalancing for February 24th, 2022. The second wave of rebalance cards for Alchemy is coming in, and let's jump right into it. So, first card, Cobalt Lancer. The ability costs to exile itself from the graveyard to draw a card. Goes from 4 blue to 1 in the blue, and I think this is pretty relevant because this might start to see play like in decks that don't even have anything to do with creatures. It is just a card that you can cantrip away from the graveyard, which in of itself is pretty good value. If you have, you might want to play this in something like a Riel deck, where you can discard it and use it from a graveyard later. Basically, if you have a bunch of draw discard effects, you can just discard this card and just cheat on the card advantage that way. So, or card disadvantage. And I think this is a pretty usable card. Death Priest of Miracle. So it is now a 3/3. Previously it was a 2/2, but more importantly, it used to have a mana cost at the triggered ability. So the line, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, create a 1/1. This used to cost 1 additional mana, and this costing nothing now is actually pretty relevant. So this can just start putting creatures into play every single turn, and I think that is pretty decent value. This is still maybe a bit too expensive to be usable in the long run, but I think it's still a pretty nice change overall. Falcon Abomination. It is gaining flash, so with all those changes, and you're going to see this a lot here, they're hitting the zombies, they're buffing zombies a lot. And not that this card would see too much play in zombies, but it is a flash flyer, so that might see play in blue tempo or blue-white tempo shells. I'm thinking Ineas and whatnot. So just flash flying in of itself is pretty decent with additional value attached to it. Hobbling Zombie now costs 2 instead of 3 mana. And now this little fella is probably going to see play in Yawgmoth, because Yawgmoth has this ratio that you always wants to have with a creature. So a creature, it needs to produce as many bodies as mana costs at the very least, right? If it's going above that rate, it's a really good card. But this is just decent in Yawgmoth because it's a 2 mana card that puts effectively 2 bodies into play to sacrifice. So that is pretty playable. Narfi Betrayer King. Mana cost reduced to 4. It used to be 5, and that is actually pretty huge. Now this might be a actual zombie commander. It's still on the weaker side, but I mean, it returns every single time from the graveyard, so that is pretty annoying. And if it gets exiled, I mean, he's your commander, so you just bring him back. And it's a pretty neat way to just give your zombies a buff, and I think that is pretty neat. Sepulchre Ghoul. It is a 2/2 from a 2/1. The main problem on this card is the once per turn sacrifice. You can't infinitely spam sacrifices, so not too sure how I feel about that. Skullscab. So they removed the non-token restriction on this one. So now it just, whenever anything gets exploited, even if a token gets exploited, you create another token, and that is pretty relevant. The problem is cards like this are pretty much critical mass dependent, and we just do not nearly have enough exploit creatures to make this insane. So you have to evaluate this as a standalone card. So basically it comes into play, you sack something and you get a 2/2. It's not too great. Stitched Assistant. Now it's 3 mana and is scry too, so that is a significant buff. Also, it's a 2/1 instead of a 3/2, but effects like these don't really care about stats. They just want stats that is decent for their mana cost, and the 2 mana 2/1 is a decent stat line for that mana cost. And now you exploit it, and it enters the battlefield, exploit, scry 2, draw a card, and that is actually pretty huge. You can, in theory, just use this as a cantrip to sacrifice itself, but then you use it in decks that care about creatures being in the graveyard. Something like Oglor, for example. You use this as an effective sorcery to scry to and draw a card, but now it's also a creature in your graveyard for things like Oglor, right? And that is pretty nifty. So Alrund has basically 2 changes. Well, first changes to the front side. So now it reveals the top 3 cards instead of the top 2. So at the beginning of end step, choose a card type, then reveal the top 3 cards of the library. And then you put all the chosen types revealed that way into the hand and the rest of the bottom in any order. Going to 3 from 2 is pretty significant. And I guess this additional stats on Haka are fine, right? Now it's pretty overstated, which I think is reasonable for a card that like bounces itself back to hand. But I think Elrond might see a little bit more play with this. I'm not sure. It's just the decks. He's in the wrong colors, is what I'm saying. Like if he was green, he would see a lot more play, for example. But he's blue, and I'm not sure where to go with this. Cosmos Charger now costs effectively 1 less mana, and also the Foretell cost is 1 less mana. And again, Flash Flying, just for the stat line, is playable in certain decks. And for 4 mana, it was pretty much unplayable. But for 3 mana, might see some play in blue tempo decks. Gitrog, Horror of Zava. So now the opponent cannot sacrifice token creatures anymore, and that is a pretty big buff, because previously you could just sandbag this card forever and ever. If you had tokens lying around, now that's not an option anymore, so that is pretty nice. Tybalt, Wicked Tormentor. Now it deals 4 damages on the +1, like on the second +1 in both instances instead of 3. So Tybalt, Wicked Tormentor deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, unless its controllers deals 4 damage to them. If they do, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So the big problem with this card obviously is that the opponent gets to like the choice of what happens to them, not you, and that is all like. This is all like the opponent will obviously always pick the thing that is like most beneficial to them. So the thing that makes Tybalt strong is the other +1, right? Not this the second +1. So I'm not sure how impactful that actually is. Tireless Angler now triggers when a swamp enters the battlefield in addition to islands. So you get to draft whenever an island or a swamp enters the battlefield. But have you seen what cards come out of this card? Yeah, it's pretty garbage. Next card. Sinister Reflection used to cost double blue, now it's cost 1 in the blue. Arguably the big deck that uses this card is Vadrock Infinite, like the Jeskai Infinite Mutate combo with the Sinister Reflections. And for a 3-color deck that goes from double blue on a casting cost to 1 in blue, that is pretty massive. So yeah, pretty nice buff there. Veiga the Watcher now has Ward 2, and that is a big change, because Ward 2, like, this is a very fragile commander, but now it's actually pretty hard to remove, like, as early. The main problem of Veiga is, if you play this in your command zone, you do not have access to red, because red is the color that usually casts spells from anywhere but hand, like Underworld Breach from the graveyard, you exile the top and play them from exile, right? Those kind of things. But it's just... like, it is a huge draw engine in colors that don't produce a lot of mana, so basically you need to cheat out Paradox Engine if you want to play this as a Storm deck, but if you play it as a control deck, why not just play any flavor of Teferi, basically. But this is certainly a step into the right direction. Townraiser Tyrant now gets nerfed a second time, so the land, the ability of the land now is triggering at the opponent's end step instead of the upkeep, so they have a little bit more time, like they can use the mana and then sacrifice. So that is a nerf to a card that didn't really see play anyways in historic Brawl, so I guess. And here is the big one. Fires of Invention now costs 4 in a red instead of 3 in a red. And the big thing with Fires of Invention is that it is, like, in Constructed, it's a build-around card, right? But you can't really have that many build-around cards in your 99. Like, if you construct your deck in a way where it only works when Fires is in play and goes into Absolute Overdrive, but Fire gets countered or you just don't find the Fires at all, then you're kind of in trouble. So you need to have a deck that Fires is very powerful in, it just happens to be very powerful in, but still functions completely fine without it. And the big deck that I can currently think of that uses this, like Shrines can use this to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. And the other one would be Grixis Control. That is the big one, the 5-mana Bolas Grixis Control. And for that deck, now you don't play, like your play pattern used to be 4-mana Fires and then wipe in the same turn. And then on 5-mana Double Threat. So you play Commander and like a removal spell or another wipe. Right, now you wipe on 4 and then you play this and your commander, but you don't have access to another wipe. So that is pretty big for this deck, but I'm not like, I don't think Fires is unplayable after this. Yeah, and this is, I'm going to link this article in the description as well. And these are basically my thoughts on all these changes. I think they're overall pretty cool, but again, for the 10th time, I prefer to not see any changes whatsoever, even if they're like cool changes. I just want a format where I know the cards will stay the same and decks don't get broken randomly, right? Because like there might be decks that just get absolutely hosed by this, and I don't see, like, I think it is absolutely fine for them to constantly change the Alchemy digital only cards, because that is the whole point of them. But I'm really not a fan of like actually paper cards that have different versions on Arena, and like leave Vega the Watcher alone, for example, but Sinister Reflection is fine because that's a digital only card anyways. But overall, I mean, the changes are pretty good for a format that they're not designed for, right? Like they do not balance around Historic Brawl. These are all for other formats, but I guess it worked out this time. So yeah, see you in the next video.